Before you get to the trains, take a quick tour of the facility. Here and learn the basics of moving around on foot. Your current objective is shown in the top left of the screen. You've just been awarded some action points. These are displayed in the top right corner of the screen and count towards your overall experience level for the game. This is one of the many route tasks you can discover. Keep an eye out for other tasks that will ask you to place, collect, or fix a variety of things. You can pause at any point to review objectives and a lot of other information about what's happening at the moment. Try it now and then return to the game after you've had a look round. Now that you've covered some of the basics of moving around and interacting with the environment, let's take a walk through the building and find the trains. This is Central Square. From here you can explore the main training center depot and surrounding yards. Your journey operating trains is just getting started here at the training center. Remember, you can always come back here from the main menu to refresh your knowledge if you're unsure about anything. In this training module, you'll learn about the on-screen overlay known as the heads-up display, or HUD. You'll see it when you're in control of a train. You can configure a range of parameters for the HUD that affect how it looks in the game settings. In this tutorial, you're going to take a look at the two main types of HUD and make a first choice of which one you prefer. Get started by climbing up the ladder into this train and sit. Welcome to the most important seat in the train. Before you can start learning how to make the train move, you're going to need to understand what the HUD is telling you. There are three types of HUD. The one you're seeing now is the normal HUD. You'll learn that first, and then take a look at the minimal HUD next. There is also a simple HUD, which is essentially a cut-down version of the normal HUD. The HUD is a guide to show you what the train is doing, how you're doing, and what your next objectives are. You can tune what's shown here using the game settings. The main part of the normal HUD is the speed display in the bottom right. Your current speed is indicated by a white bar that will appear on the outside of the speedometer, and there is a red mark that indicates the maximum permitted speed. This is the direction display. An arrow will indicate the forward, reverse, and neutral directions. A cross, or X, means the reverser is currently either not inserted or in the off position. This is the power display. A number will indicate what position the power or throttle control is in. If the display is white, it refers to power. If the display is yellow, it means powered braking or dynamic braking. If the display is red, then the throttle is currently locked out and you will need to take steps to release the lock before power can be applied. You can learn about troubleshooting elsewhere in Training Center. These are the brake indicators. The exact one shown will vary by train and will often be visible in the train itself on the various gauges. These gauges tell you what is happening in the braking system. The most important one is the BC, or brake cylinder. In most trains, when this reads 0, that means the brakes are released. Anything else and the brakes are applied. In the top right is the track monitor. This shows you the line ahead and allows you to see all the signals and speed limit changes that you're approaching. By default, the track monitor shows the signals with their actual red, yellow, or green aspect. But when you get more confidence, you can hide this information via an option in the game settings. As you accelerate, the track monitor will extend its look-ahead distance so you can see much further ahead at higher speeds. This is all done automatically. Now that you're familiar with the normal HUD, it's time to take a look at the minimal HUD. You can change this via the game settings, but for this tutorial the game will change it automatically. You can see that most of the HUD is now gone. You are left with basic information in the top left corner. The minimal HUD immerses you in the experience of driving the train. Use the train's real gauges as much as possible. In the top left corner, you will see the information about your next objective and some limited information about what the train's doing, such as your current speed, the speed limit, and the gradient. Use the game settings to add and remove information from the minimal HUD. With less information, you'll find driving more challenging, but also more immersive and rewarding. Experienced players might prefer the minimal HUD, especially when driving from the cab view. The normal HUD is ideal for newcomers or anyone who wants to drive from an external camera. You can switch HUDs in game settings. Do you want to start with the normal HUD or minimal HUD? That concludes this module. If you wish to replay it, you can come back to it at any time via the Training Center. In this training module, you'll be learning about vehicles called control cars or cab cars. In the UK, they're often called driving van trailer or DVT cars, and you will likely come across other names for them too. The name cab car will be used for the rest of this module to keep it simple. Cab cars are essentially a passenger coach with a driving cab in them, but most importantly, they have no means of propulsion themselves. There are no engines or motors, so they can't move under their own power. The way that a cab car works is it will remotely control a locomotive at the other end of the train, and this is where it's important to understand their behaviour as being a little different to the cab experience of the locomotive itself. There may be a little lag in control response, and you may not quite have the same instrument outputs as you do in the locomotive itself. For this module, you'll be taking this German Doppelstock cab car, which has a BR146.2 locomotive at the other end, setting it up and then driving it forwards to a marker at the other end of the yard area. Revisit this module a couple of times to try different things out and get familiar with the subtle difference when driving from the cab car. One of the biggest and most obvious differences when driving from the cab car is that there's a lot less sound. Since all the motors and fans are at the other end of the train, it can be a little disconcerting at first.
Störung, Störung.
Engage the brake system by turning this key. Put the reverser in forward. Turn on the headlights and set the signal light switch to headlight. Ensure the doors are closed. Release the brakes and apply some power to get moving. It feels a little odd at first. All the audio cues you're used to in the cab aren't present here, so you just need to give the locomotive time to react to your commands. Experiment with some power and some brakes and see how the train reacts. You may find some sharp jolts happening because of how the slack is being bunched up or stretched out by the loco at the back. You can minimize this by making your first power or brake applications lighter and then increasing them. You'll get used to this with practice and experience.
Störung, Störung.
In this training module, you'll be learning about vehicles called control cars or cab cars. In the UK, they're often called driving van trailer or DVT cars, and you will likely come across other names for them too. The name cab car will be used for the rest of this module to keep it simple. Cab cars are essentially a passenger coach with a driving cab in them, but most importantly, they have no means of propulsion themselves. There are no engines or motors, so they can't move under their own power. The way that a cab car works is it will remotely control a locomotive at the other end of the train, and this is where it's important to understand their behavior as being a little different to the cab experience of the locomotive itself. There may be a little lag in control response, and you may not quite have the same instrument outputs as you do in the locomotive itself. For this module, you'll be taking this German Doppelstock cab car, which has a BR146.2 locomotive at the other end, setting it up and then driving it forwards to a marker at the other end of the yard area. Revisit this module a couple of times to try different things out and get familiar with the subtle difference when driving from the cab car. One of the biggest and most obvious differences when driving from the cab car is that there's a lot less sound. Since all the motors and fans are at the other end of the train, it can be a little disconcerting at first. Engage the turn on ensure the doors are closed. Release the brakes and apply some power to get moving. It feels a little odd at first. All the audio cues you're used to in the cab aren't present here, so you just need to give the locomotive time to react to your commands. Experiment with some power and some brakes and see how the train reacts. You may find some sharp jolts happening because of how the slack is being bunched up or stretched out by the loco at the back. You can minimize this by making your first power or brake applications lighter and then increasing them. You'll get used to this with practice and experience. Cut the power and coast the rest of the way. This is far enough. Bring the train to a stop now by applying the train brake. This is just a brief introduction to cab cars. The Changing Ends for Cab Cars training module goes into more depth about both the cab car and the BR146.2 locomotive on the other end of the train. That concludes this module. If you wish to replay it, you can come back to it at any time via the training center. In this training module, you'll practice going between the BR146.2 locomotive at one end of the train and the cab car at the other. All the junctions are being taken care of for you by another team member, allowing you to focus on driving. You're starting here in a siding near the main loop. Get started by climbing in. Insert the reverser handle and set the reverser to forward. Set the headlights to bright and on the back wheel set the signal lights to headlights. Release the brakes and apply power to get moving towards the marker. Stop anywhere here by applying the brakes.
Störung. Störung.
In this training module, you'll practice going between the BR1462 locomotive at one end of the train and the cab car at the other. All the junctions are being taken care of for you by another team member, allowing you to focus on driving. You're starting here in a siding near the main loop. Get started by climbing in. Insert the reverser handle and set the reverser to forward.
Störung.
Set the
Störung.
headlights to bright, and on the back wheel set the signal lights to headlights. Release the brakes and apply power to get moving towards the marker. Stop anywhere here by applying the brakes.
Störung.
It's time to get the locomotive cab shut down. Move the train brake handle to the full service position. Set the reverser to off and remove the reverser handle. That will deactivate the cab. On the back wall, change the signal lights to tail lights so that the locomotive shows red lights now that it's at the rear of the train. With the cab shut down, you can move to the other end of the train. Exit the cab and walk along the side of the train to the cab car. Don't forget to close the door before you leave. Open a passenger door on the cab car to get in and make your way to the cab and sit in the driver's seat. You now need to get this cab set up. Start by turning the brake key to activate the brakes. Insert the reverser handle and set the reverser to forward. Set the headlights to high beams and on the back wall set the signal lights to headlights. Check if there are any doors open, and if so, close them. You're good to go. Release the brakes, apply the power, and take the train out. You're headed out onto the main line and will be stopping at the main station on the loop. That concludes this module. If you wish to replay it, you can come back to it at any time via the training center. In this training module, you're going to learn how the German AFB cruise control system works. Many German trains use this type of cruise control, and much of the fundamentals you learn here will apply to other trains that have some equivalent form of cruise control. It's important to note that there are fundamentally two types of cruise control. One is an active system like AFB, which will manage your speed positively using throttle and brake as needed. The other is a speed set system, which is useful for setting a maximum speed. Speed set could usually maintain your speed, but can't reduce it as easily as a system like AFB. For this exercise, you'll be doing 2 laps of the main loop here at the training center. The first time around, you'll be learning how to set up AFB and use it from standstill. The second time, you'll learn how to enable AFB while your train is already running. Set up the train, but don't start moving yet.
Störung, Störung.
Turn the AFB system on.
AFB, AFB, AFB.
You can now set the target cruise speed using the AFB lever. Set it to 40 km per hour for now. Release the brakes and apply power. As the train accelerates, you can apply more power as needed. The train has reached its cruise target and has cut power. It will now manage the speed as needed automatically. You can leave the power handle with the power applied, and this grants the amount of power available for AFB to use. Increase the AFB lever to 80 km per hour and watch the train accelerate to the new target.
AFB, AFB, AFB. AFB, AFB, AFB.
release the AFB lever back to 40 kilometers per hour and see the train will manage itself back to 40 kilometers per hour. Coming back to the platform, so set the throttle to off and get on the brakes as needed to come to a stop somewhere in the station. Getting AFB running while stationary is quite straightforward, but sometimes you may want to activate it while you're on the move without having to stop.
AFB,
Set the AFB
AFB,
lever to off
AFB.
and turn the AFB switch to off so that we can try that exercise next. Now you're doing about 40 kilometers per hour, it's time to get the AFB system enabled. First, completely cup the power handle to off. Next, set the AFB to the maximum position. Don't worry, it can't do anything because the power handle is set to off. Now activate the AFB switch to turn
AFB,
AFB on.
AFB, AFB.
Move the AFB lever to 80 kilometers per hour so it can speed up. Finally, apply some power. Notice that we're now accelerating, and if all has gone well, you'll see the power cut out around the 80 kilometers per hour mark as AFB is managing your speed. Pretend there's a signal restriction coming up ahead and you need to apply the brakes. Use the brake lever to bring the train down to around 40 kilometers per hour and then release the brakes. Notice how even though the cruise control is set to 80 kilometers per hour still and power is applied, it's still not accelerating. This is because the brake application caused a throttle lockout. To reset it, you need to put the power back to off and then reapply it. Perfect. You're accelerating back up to 80 kilometers per hour. Headed back to the station again, so bring the throttle to off and use your brakes to bring the train to a stop in the platform. It is important to remember that a cruise control system like this is no substitute for the driver paying attention and remaining responsible for the train. Cruise control systems also cannot be relied upon to slow the train at an appropriate rate when approaching red signals or speed reductions, so you should be ready to use your brakes as needed. That concludes this module. If you wish to replay, you can come back to it at any time via the training center.
In this training module, you'll be taken through the operation of this Class 350/1 electric multiple unit. For this introduction, you'll be driving the train a short distance and performing passenger operations. Sit. Sit. This electric multiple unit, or EMU, features dual electrification and can be used with both third rail and overhead electrification. Set the pantograph switch to the up position. Set the headlights to Set the reverser to forward. This controls the direction of travel. On level grades, you can coast to maintain your speed, reducing energy consumption and stress on the motors. When coasting, always remain vigilant of the gradient, as changes could cause the train to speed up or slow down. Keeping to speed limits is important. If you begin overspeeding, apply a small amount of braking force by moving the combined power brake handle into the braking range. You're approaching the station. Begin applying a small amount of braking force by moving the combined power brake handle into the braking range. Nice job. Close the doors and drive to the next. Good work. That concludes all the basics of operating this train.
In this training module, you will be learning to operate this EMD F125 Spirit diesel locomotive. During this brief introduction, you will be taken through the critical driving controls and performing passenger operations. When you're ready to begin, climb aboard. Sit in the engineer's seat. You'll now go through the steps needed to take over this locomotive. You will need to set the generator. This locomotive requires the reverser hand. Switch the front headlights on. Regardless of the time of day or weather, all locomotives must have their headlights on. You'll need to set the brakes to the correct mode to allow them to be controlled by this cab. We can now begin loading. It is time to depart. Close the passenger doors. The automatic brakes are controlled with their own handle, but will blend the dynamic brakes and air brakes. The air brakes will apply braking force to every car in this formation. The master controller controls both the throttle and dynamic brakes. Dynamic brakes use the locomotive's electric traction motors to generate resistance to reduce the wear of the brake pads. Apply a small amount of throttle. On level grades, you can coast to maintain your speed, reducing energy consumption and stress on the motors. Keeping to speed limits is important. If you begin overspeeding, slow the train using the master controller's dynamic brake range. The EMD F125 is a passenger locomotive manufactured by Electromotive Diesel for the North American market. It's powered by a Caterpillar C127-20 V20 diesel engine, rated at 4,700 horsepower, 3,500 kilowatts, and is capable of speeds up to 125 miles per hour, 201 kilometers an hour. When it launched in 2017, it was the first new passenger locomotive in North America in 15 years. To date, 40 have been produced, all of which were supplied to Metrolink. The F125 features a modern streamlined body designed by Vossloh España. You are approaching the station. Begin applying a small amount of braking force using the automatic brake to bring the train to a gentle stop. Nice job! The train has safely come to a stop. You can now begin loading. Good work. That concludes all of the basics of operating this train.